The world had slept for longer than anyone could remember. Cities once brimming with life now stood silent, their glass towers reflecting only the sky and the creeping green of vines that climbed every wall. Roads were cracked, broken by roots that forced their way through asphalt like nature reclaiming what humans had stolen. Rivers meandered freely through the streets, carrying away the memories of a world that had grown too busy, too loud, and too fragile. Humanity had entered slumber, and for centuries the planet had waited, patient and still. When the first humans woke, the sensation was dizzying. It was as if time had been compressed into a single breath. Their eyes fluttered open to a world both familiar and alien. They did not remember how long they had been asleep, and the concept of time itself felt slippery, like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. Memories were faint whispers, echoes of laughter, work, family, and fear, but the instinct to survive was immediate. The instinct was strong. Those first moments were disorienting. A man stumbled through a collapsed building, dust falling from every surface. He breathed in the air, heavy with the scent of wet earth and rotting wood, and realized the silence was almost unbearable. No engines roared, no planes flew, no voices called. Only the wind and the distant rustle of unseen creatures. Yet he did not feel fear alone. He felt a spark, a tiny flame of curiosity, a sense that the world had not ended, only paused. As more humans began to awaken, small groups formed naturally, drawn to each other by instinct and need. Their numbers were few at first, scattered across abandoned neighborhoods and cracked highways. They shared what they could, food, clothing, knowledge recalled from the fragments of memory, and began to explore cautiously. There was much to discover. Broken machines lay dormant, some with strange humming cores, and buildings held rooms filled with objects no one recognized. The humans learned to approach these things with curiosity, not fear, and slowly their confidence grew. It was not long before they realized they were not alone. Shadows moved in ways that were too deliberate to belong to wind or animals. In the ruins of a shopping district, a group encountered creatures unlike anything they had seen before. They were tall, lean, and covered in a mix of metal and flesh, their eyes glowing faintly. They did not attack immediately, but their presence made the humans' hearts pound. Even without words, the creatures seemed aware, intelligent, and curious. Humanity's first instinct was to hide, but instinct alone could not drive them. They observed, waited, and learned. Through trial and error, humans discovered patterns in the creatures' behavior. Some were cautious, keeping their distance, while others moved closer, as if testing boundaries. In a small, abandoned library, a young woman named Ilara found an old device, something like a communication terminal. She pressed buttons randomly, expecting nothing, and was shocked when the screen flickered to life. Strange symbols appeared, unintelligible, but it felt like a connection, a whisper from a world long asleep. She called to the others, and together they began experimenting, trying to make sense of the remnants of human technology. Food was another challenge. Crops had long since withered, but the wild had not been idle. Edible plants had spread across fields and parks, and rivers teemed with fish that had adapted to urban waters. The humans learned quickly, for they had no choice. Their bodies remembered hunger and the thrill of discovery together. When they tasted the first wild berries, sun-warmed and surprisingly sweet, there was a moment of laughter, a joy that echoed through the empty streets. It was small, but it reminded them they were alive, and that life could continue even after ages of stillness. Despite these small victories, danger was everywhere. Creatures sometimes acted aggressively, testing humans' defenses. A massive, spider-like construct with glinting metal limbs descended upon a group one evening. The humans scattered, diving into broken buildings and dodging debris. One man, Lior, found a way to topple a rusted sign onto the creature, buying them time to escape. These encounters taught them lessons faster than any manual or lecture ever could. Humans discovered that their strength was not in force alone, but in observation, strategy, and cooperation. Every individual's skill, no matter how small, mattered in the balance between survival and death. The nights were the hardest. Darkness had taken on a new weight in a world where humans were no longer the only awake beings. Strange sounds echoed through the ruins. A metallic clatter, a low hum, the rustle of movement that always seemed just beyond the corner of the eye. Some humans began to dream vividly, even in these first weeks of waking. Dreams of past lives, of cities as they once were, and of things that had evolved in the silence. Some believed these dreams were warnings. Others thought they were guidance. But all agreed. Sleep was a luxury they could not afford yet. As the days passed, humans began mapping their surroundings. They marked paths through streets where creatures were least likely to roam. They found high vantage points in broken towers, giving them views of miles of abandoned landscapes. In one such lookout, Ilara spotted a massive silhouette moving slowly across a field. It was taller than any building, metallic segments glinting in the sunlight. The group froze, heartbeats loud in the stillness, and then it stopped, as if it had noticed them, and simply watched. It was in these moments that the humans realized something profound. Even though they had slept for centuries, the world had not remained dormant, and neither had its guardians. Some of the creatures were creations of humans, forgotten and left to evolve in isolation. Others were purely natural, shaped by centuries of adaptation. But all of them were formidable, and all of them were curious. Humanity had no grand plan yet, no armies or governments to enforce order. But what they had was determination, adaptability, and each other. They began forming simple societies, small clusters of families and friends who trusted each other implicitly. They shared food, stories, and knowledge. They began experimenting with old machinery, figuring out what could still work, and repurposing it. Even broken drones became scouts, and solar panels became power sources for small devices. The most important discovery, however, was understanding the creatures. They were not mindless. They had strategies, observed patterns, and occasionally, when humans dared to approach with caution, they seemed to respond almost like equals. The humans realized that fear alone would not protect them. Curiosity, intelligence, and teamwork were their true weapons. Ilara became a quiet leader in the group, not by force, but by the way she approached problems. When a creature blocked their path to a water source, she observed it for hours, learning its routines before guiding the humans along a different route. She found ways to communicate subtly, using gestures and signals, testing whether the creatures could recognize intent rather than threat. Slowly, small successes built confidence. Humanity had awoken not just to survive, but to engage with a world that had moved on without them. One morning, after a night of relentless rain, the group found remnants of an old research facility on the outskirts of the city. Its walls were crumbling, but inside were rows of devices, screens, and terminals covered in dust. When they brushed away the layers of neglect, a terminal flickered on. Symbols and data streamed across the screen, and in that moment, humans understood that knowledge survived even when the hands that created it had vanished. The facility contained recordings of experiments, maps of the old world, and automated systems still functioning. Some of the recordings hinted at a reason for their slumber, a protective measure against threats from beyond the stars, a pause to prevent humanity from destroying itself. It was a revelation that filled them with awe and fear at the same time. They were waking into a world that had prepared for their absence, and not all of its preparations were benign. Yet the humans did not falter. Each obstacle was a lesson, each encounter a test. They began training, sharing skills and knowledge, learning to build traps, repair machines, and anticipate the actions of creatures far more powerful than themselves. They discovered that patience could be a weapon, and unpredictability could turn the tide of encounters. In their slumber, the world had evolved, but so had the human spirit. By the end of the first months, the group had established a small sanctuary, a place that could be defended and sustained. Plants were cultivated, water was stored, and the lessons of survival were taught to every member. The humans laughed more, cried more, and felt more intensely than they had in generations. They were waking not just to a world, but to life itself, and life was far more precious when it had been nearly lost. And in the distance, the creatures watched. Some approached cautiously, others retreated. The humans were learning that observation and respect could sometimes be as powerful as any weapon. Something in the air, a tension unspoken yet palpable, suggested that the awakenings were not over. The world had waited, and now humanity had begun to step into the light once more. It was only the beginning. The cities, the machines, the creatures, all of it was alive, all of it awake, and all of it watching. Humanity had slept for ages, but now, slowly, deliberately, it was learning to stand. And in that first stand, in those first steps into a world that had moved on, they found something undeniable. Even after centuries, the spark of human ingenuity and resilience could not be extinguished. The world was dangerous, beautiful, and full of possibility, and the humans would meet it head-on. The sun set over a city reclaimed by nature, casting long shadows over cracked streets. In the distance, the faint glint of eyes, metallic and organic, followed their every movement. A whisper of wind carried a promise, one that humans did not fully understand yet. The world had slept, but it was waking. And so was humanity. The days following their first cautious explorations brought new discoveries, but they also brought new dangers. The humans had begun to understand their surroundings, mapping the ruined cities and forming small, safe zones. Yet the world was far from empty. The creatures they had glimpsed earlier were not the only ones. Strange machines, some half buried in the earth, others perched like sentinels atop crumbling buildings, moved with purpose. They seemed to watch, learning, testing. Ilara and her group knew instinct alone would not keep them safe. Observation had become their lifeline. They began tracking the creatures' movements, noting patterns in their patrols, their feeding routines, even the faint electrical hums that preceded activity. Each day, the humans learned a little more. Their survival depended on patience, and patience had become a weapon. One morning, while scouting near the remains of a tall office building, Lior noticed faint footprints in the soft earth that had not been there before. They were not human, and their shape suggested a mechanical precision, yet they were irregular enough to hint at intelligence. "They're not mindless," he said quietly, kneeling to examine the tracks. "They think. They plan." Ilara knelt beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "And if they think, we can outthink them," she said. The words were more than a plan. They were a promise. The humans were learning quickly that the creature's greatest strength, power, could be countered by human ingenuity. Food remained a constant concern. While wild plants and scavenged resources sustained them, they could not rely on chance alone. Ilara began experimenting with the few seeds they could find, cultivating small gardens within protected areas. The team constructed rudimentary irrigation systems from broken pipes, old tanks, and the runoff from damaged buildings. Each success was celebrated, a small victory in a world that had grown both beautiful and dangerous. Yet the humans were not alone in their struggle. One afternoon, a scouting team returned with tales of a new type of entity. This one was larger, its form partially organic, but reinforced with metal plating. It moved in coordinated patterns, as if leading smaller machines. The humans had learned quickly to avoid confrontation whenever possible, but the presence of a commander suggested organized intent. The creatures were not random. They were evolving, strategizing. Ilara called a meeting in their central sanctuary. Around a fire fueled by scavenged wood and oil, the humans discussed strategy. "We cannot fight them head-on," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But we can observe, learn, and strike when we have the advantage. Intelligence is our weapon, not strength." The group nodded, understanding that every action from now on would require careful planning. To gather information, they began using old drones and repurposed cameras, setting up hidden observation points. Some of the mechanical creatures were curious, approaching the devices, allowing humans to record their behavior. Others were cautious, retreating at the first sign of detection. Over time, the humans realized that the creatures were learning as well. Each encounter was a test, a measure of their own growing understanding. One day, while exploring the ruins of an old university, Ilara stumbled upon a room filled with old computer systems. Dust covered the surfaces, and the screens flickered weakly, yet some still held data. She tapped a key, and a map of the old world appeared, detailing research stations, power grids, and, most astonishing, areas marked as biological experiments. The humans stared at the map, realization dawning. Humanity had left behind creations that were now awake. Some had been designed to protect, others to explore, but without guidance, many had become unpredictable. The implications were staggering. The slumber of humanity had not only allowed nature to reclaim the world, but had given these creations centuries to evolve. And yet, as daunting as the reality was, the humans felt a surge of purpose. They were not simply survivors. They were reclaiming a world that had grown beyond them. And in doing so, they would demonstrate the resilience that had always defined humanity. Over the following weeks, the humans' activities became bolder. They tested boundaries, exploring areas previously deemed too dangerous. One scouting team discovered a massive library filled with preserved books, research papers, and journals. Knowledge that had survived centuries of abandonment became a treasure trove. They learned about old energy systems, agricultural techniques, and even defensive strategies that had been used during past conflicts. Every scrap of information was another tool in their growing arsenal. The encounters with creatures grew more frequent. In one particularly tense encounter, a small group of humans crossed a wide plaza and was confronted by a pack of medium-sized machines, moving in synchronized patterns. The humans froze, knowing that a wrong move could be fatal. But instead of attacking, they observed. The machines circled, assessed, and eventually retreated, as if acknowledging the humans' intelligence. It was a moment of both relief and revelation. Confrontation did not always lead to destruction. Sometimes, understanding could lead to temporary peace. Despite their successes, the humans were aware that danger was never far. One night, a massive storm swept across the city, turning streets into rivers and threatening their sanctuary. The humans worked tirelessly to reinforce their shelters, divert water, and protect their gardens. It was exhausting, and some questioned whether survival was possible. Yet, through collaboration, ingenuity, and sheer will, they endured. The storm passed, leaving the city battered but intact. And the humans felt the thrill of victory over forces that seemed indifferent to life itself. In the aftermath, they began to notice changes in the creatures. Some were adapting to human strategies, learning to avoid traps and anticipate movement. Others seemed to experiment with their own tactics, testing the humans' responses. It was clear that intelligence, both organic and artificial, was at play. And yet, humans were not intimidated. They had discovered a profound truth. The world could challenge them, even evolve, but human adaptability was unmatched. Lior proposed a daring plan. "We should attempt to communicate," he said. "If some of them are intelligent, maybe we can learn from them. Maybe we can avoid unnecessary conflict." At first, some were skeptical. The creatures had caused fear and destruction, and trust seemed impossible. But Alara recognized the opportunity. Knowledge could be gained not only through survival but through dialogue, and humans had always found ways to communicate, even with those who were different. Using a combination of gestures, sounds, and repurposed signals from old machines, the humans attempted contact. The first attempts were met with hesitation and retreat. The creatures seemed cautious, assessing intent, testing boundaries, but over time subtle patterns emerged. Some of the creatures began to mimic signals, approach without aggression, and even follow humans at a distance. It was not full communication, but it was a start. The humans realized that curiosity could be mutual, and that even in a world filled with danger, connection was possible. Meanwhile, the humans discovered more advanced technology hidden in the ruins. Some machines, dormant for centuries, could be reactivated. Using scavenged parts and energy sources, they began building simple defensive systems. Not to dominate, but to protect themselves. A network of alarms, small drones, and traps allowed the humans to explore further, always knowing when danger was near. The ruins became both home and laboratory, a place where ingenuity turned fear into opportunity. A major breakthrough came when the humans discovered a partially functional vehicle in the remains of an old transport hub. Rust covered its exterior, and many components were missing, yet it held potential. Over weeks, they repaired engines, replaced systems with scavenged parts, and managed to bring it to life. The first journey was cautious, navigating streets overrun by nature, avoiding patrols of creatures, and testing the limits of the machine. When it succeeded, the humans celebrated. They had not only survived, they had begun to reclaim mobility, and with it, the ability to explore and understand a larger world. The creatures, ever present, began to react. Some followed the vehicle at a distance, intrigued. Others retreated, seemingly respecting the humans' ability to wield tools and strategies beyond instinct. It was a lesson reinforced again and again. Humans could think, innovate, and adapt in ways that even evolved entities could not fully anticipate. By the end of the second cycle of months, the humans had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. Their sanctuary was more secure, their knowledge deeper, and their understanding of the creatures clearer. They had learned that the world had changed, but so had they. Survival was no longer only about hiding or fleeing. It was about observation, learning, and decisive action. Ilara looked out over the city one evening, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows over streets tangled with roots and rubble. She thought about how far they had come, from confusion and fear to understanding and control. Humanity was waking not just physically but mentally and strategically. They were learning to coexist, to negotiate the dangers of a world that had evolved in their absence. And in every small success, they proved a simple truth. Humans could adapt, endure, and even thrive where others might fail. Yet, as she watched, she could not ignore the larger silhouette moving in the distance, something far bigger than the creatures they had faced so far. Something deliberate and commanding. The humans had survived the initial awakening, but the challenges ahead were more complex. The evolved entities were beginning to organize, to recognize patterns in human behavior, and to respond in ways that demanded not only courage, but ingenuity. Ilara knew the path forward would not be easy. The humans had awakened to a world full of threats, mysteries, and possibilities. Each day brought new lessons, new encounters, and new victories. But the spark of humanity, curiosity, intelligence, and resilience had endured through the centuries of sleep. And it was that spark, small yet brilliant, that would guide them through the trials to come. The wind carried the hum of distant machines and the rustle of foliage. Humans had reclaimed a measure of security, but the planet was alive in ways they were only beginning to understand. And somewhere in the shadows, the evolved beings continued to watch, adapt, and plan. It was a world of wonder, danger, and endless possibility. Humanity had awakened, and now they were ready to meet it fully, not as prey, but as survivors, thinkers, and innovators. The age of quiet had ended. The age of human ingenuity had begun. The humans had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident in the months since they first awoke. Their small sanctuary, tucked among ruined towers and tangled streets, was a hub of learning, exploration, and preparation. They had discovered ways to grow food, harness old technologies, and observe the creatures that roamed the abandoned city. They had learned to move quietly, anticipate danger, and communicate with one another in ways that went beyond words. Yet, as the humans became bolder, the creatures they had faced began to show signs of organization. Small groups no longer moved randomly. They patrolled with precision. Signals and patterns emerged that suggested coordination and planning. The humans recognized the signs immediately. They were being studied, assessed, and tested. And then came the first glimpse of something entirely different, a creature not like any they had encountered before, something massive, intelligent, and dangerous. Ilara and Lior were scouting near a collapsed bridge when they saw it. Towering over the buildings, its frame gleamed with metallic armor, and its movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. It was humanoid in form, but far larger than any human or machine they had seen. Lights ran along its body, pulsing like the heartbeat of a city. Around it, smaller machines moved in tight formations, responding instantly to its commands. The humans froze, hearts pounding, knowing instinctively that this was a level of threat unlike anything they had yet faced. "Is it controlling them?" whispered Lior, barely able to keep his voice steady. Ilara nodded slowly. "Yes, and if it notices us, we won't survive a direct fight." The humans retreated, careful to remain hidden among the ruins, and returned to the sanctuary to plan. Their community gathered in the largest remaining building, an old library reinforced with scavenged materials. They had learned that brute force alone would not win this battle. Observation, strategy, and adaptability would be their greatest weapons. Over the next several days, scouts documented the Guardian's movements. They discovered that it operated in cycles, resting during certain hours and patrolling in predictable routes. But they also realized that it was learning from their behavior, adjusting patrols, and coordinating the smaller machines with increasing precision. The humans had to outthink something far more powerful than themselves. Ilara called a council meeting. "We cannot defeat it directly," she said, her tone steady despite the tension in the room. "But we can use the environment to our advantage. The city is full of ruins, traps, and hidden passages. We can move unpredictably, strike when it least expects, and force it into positions where its strength is a disadvantage." The humans spent the next week preparing. They constructed barriers, camouflaged traps, and devised signaling systems that would allow them to communicate silently during engagements. They also focused on mobility, repairing vehicles, and creating simple transport systems that could move quickly and quietly across the city. Every member of the community had a role to play, and every skill, no matter how small, was essential. Finally, the day came when the Guardian approached their territory. It moved slowly, deliberately, commanding the smaller machines with precision. The humans held their breath, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. They had learned to observe patterns, and this was the moment to test everything they had prepared. The first engagement was small. A scouting party lured a group of smaller machines into a narrow alley lined with traps. The machines fell into pits, caught on barricades, and were neutralized without direct confrontation. The humans watched from above, hearts racing, realizing that even small victories mattered. The Guardian observed from a distance, its glowing eyes scanning the city, and then it shifted its attention elsewhere. The humans knew they had to remain patient. Over the next days, they escalated their strategy. They set up decoys, leading patrols into areas where environmental hazards would disable or delay them. They used old cranes, cables, and debris to create obstacles that forced the machines into predictable paths. Each encounter was a test, and each test taught the humans more about their opponent's behavior. But the Guardian was not passive. It began adapting, learning from human tactics. The humans realized that the battle was not only physical, but also mental. They had to remain unpredictable, using feints, diversions, and unconventional thinking to stay one step ahead. It became clear that the Guardian's greatest strength, control and precision, could also be a weakness. Humans, capable of creativity and improvisation, could exploit that rigidity. The turning point came when Lior discovered a pattern in the Guardian's energy pulses. Its systems required periodic cooling, during which its speed and responsiveness were slightly reduced. The humans realized that if they could lure the Guardian into a controlled trap at the right moment, they could disable, or at least slow it down significantly. It was a dangerous plan, one that required perfect timing and coordination. Alara organized a strike team. Using the repaired vehicle and improvised signals, they executed a series of feints, drawing the Guardian toward a section of the city they had prepared. The smaller machines followed, ensnared in traps and barriers. The Guardian pursued, unaware of the hazards hidden along its path. When it reached the central point, a combination of falling debris, electrical discharges, and controlled explosions immobilized it temporarily. The humans acted quickly. Teams moved in to disable critical components, using tools salvaged from the ruins and old machinery repurposed for the task. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and the air was filled with tension. For a moment it seemed impossible, but the humans' patience, preparation, and coordination prevailed. The Guardian faltered, and the smaller machines retreated, confused and disorganized. The humans had achieved what had seemed impossible. In the aftermath, they did not celebrate with noise or fanfare. The battle had been costly, and the city bore the scars. Yet, they felt a surge of pride. They had faced a being far stronger, faster, and more intelligent than themselves, and had survived. More than that, they had learned that their greatest strengths were not strength or weapons, but observation, adaptability, and teamwork. The humans had begun to reclaim not just territory, but confidence in their own ingenuity. Ilara addressed the community. "We have won a battle, but not the war," she said. "The world is full of challenges, some we can see, some we cannot. But if we continue to work together, to observe, to adapt, there is no challenge we cannot face. Today proves that humanity, our minds, our courage, our will, is a force that cannot be ignored." The Guardian, though disabled, was not destroyed. Its systems were still partially functional, a reminder that the world contained threats far beyond human comprehension. But the humans understood something vital. Survival did not require dominance. It required strategy, creativity, and unity. And those were qualities humans had in abundance. In the following weeks, the humans strengthened their sanctuary, incorporating lessons from the encounter. They mapped escape routes, reinforced defenses, and developed signaling systems that could alert the community to approaching danger. The creatures, some curious, some cautious, continued to observe from a distance, their behavior shaped by the humans' unpredictable actions. Humanity had become a force not through power alone, but through ingenuity and learning. The community began to expand. More humans awoke in distant ruins and traveled toward the sanctuary, drawn by the signs of life and safety. Knowledge was shared, and new members brought skills and ideas that further strengthened the group. The humans were no longer isolated survivors. They were a growing society, learning to thrive in a world that had evolved without them. Ilara and Lior continued their scouting missions, always careful, always observant. They discovered new resources, unexplored areas, and additional creatures. Each encounter reinforced the truth they had learned. The world was alive, full of challenges, and humanity was capable of meeting them. The Guardians' presence, though partially neutralized, was a constant reminder that intelligence and adaptability were critical for survival. One evening, as the sun set behind the ruins, casting long shadows over the city, Ilara looked over the community. Children played near the gardens, elders tended to repairs, and scouts returned with news of discoveries. Despite the dangers, there was a sense of hope, a recognition that humanity had awakened not merely to survive, but to reclaim and understand the world. The Guardian, dormant but not destroyed, emitted faint hums in the distance. It was a presence both threatening and instructive, teaching the humans that every action, every decision could have consequences far beyond what they could see. Yet they were no longer passive. They had learned, adapted, and responded with ingenuity. They had faced a challenge greater than themselves and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. In the quiet of the night, with the city bathed in moonlight, the humans understood a profound truth. The world had slept, but it had not forgotten. And now, humanity had awakened not only to reclaim it, but to prove that even after centuries of dormancy, they could think, adapt, and endure. Their survival was no longer accidental. It was intentional, driven by courage, intelligence, and unity. The horizon promised new challenges. The Guardians' distant hum hinted at forces yet to be fully understood. Other creatures, evolved and cunning, moved silently in the shadows. The humans would face more trials, some dangerous, some bewildering, and some unlike anything they had imagined. But they had learned the greatest lesson of all. Intelligence, creativity, and cooperation could turn even the most daunting threat into an opportunity. Ilara closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of responsibility and the strength of possibility. Humanity had awakened to a world that had moved on without them, but they had also awakened to themselves, capable, resourceful, and resilient. The Guardian might rise again. Other threats would come, but they were ready, and the spark of human ingenuity would continue to burn, no matter the darkness. As dawn broke, painting the ruined city with shades of gold and crimson, humans moved through the streets with purpose. Their sanctuary was stronger, their minds sharper, and their hearts full of determination. The battle had taught them not only how to survive, but how to thrive in a world that tested every instinct, every skill, and every choice. The world had slept, and it had changed. But humanity, small and seemingly fragile, had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could adapt, endure, and grow stronger. And the future, uncertain as it was, belonged to those willing to observe, to learn, and to act with courage. The months after the battle with the Guardian had changed the humans in ways they could feel, but not yet fully understand. The community had grown stronger, more organized, and more confident. Skills were shared, resources secured, and knowledge passed along like a living library of survival. Every person had a role, every action mattered, and the group had learned to act as one. The city, once a silent monument to a forgotten age, had become a home filled with purpose, laughter, and determination. But the world was far from calm. The Guardian, though partially disabled, had signaled to other entities in the distance. The humans observed movement on the horizon, shapes emerging that were larger, more complex, and coordinated. The creatures they had faced individually were beginning to form networks, communicating and responding to one another with intelligence that rivaled human ingenuity. It was a reminder that the awakening of humanity had not gone unnoticed. Ilara stood atop the highest tower of their sanctuary, looking out over the city. Her eyes traced the movement of a distant mechanical figure, larger than anything they had encountered before, moving with deliberate purpose. Around it, smaller machines flitted like sparks, coordinating in patterns that suggested strategy and leadership. Humanity had survived the first threats, but the next challenge would test every lesson they had learned, every skill they had developed. "We need to prepare," she said to Lior, who had joined her on the tower. "They are learning too, and if we wait, we will lose the advantage." Lior nodded, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. "We've adapted before. We can do it again. But this time, it will require everything we have, every mind, every skill, every ounce of courage." The community sprang into action. They reinforced their defenses, expanded observation points, and coordinated groups for reconnaissance, scouting, and rapid response. Their communication systems were refined, using signals, sounds, and devices that allowed messages to travel across the city instantly. They trained together, anticipating challenges, and rehearsed strategies for various scenarios. Every day was preparation, every night a moment to rest and reflect. Then came the first direct engagement. A massive contingent of creatures moved into the outskirts of their territory, larger and more organized than anything humans had faced before. They did not attack immediately, but scouted, probing defenses and testing reactions. The humans observed from vantage points, analyzing movements and waiting for the right moment. The lesson from the Guardian had been clear. Patience, strategy, and adaptability were the keys to survival. Ilara and Lior led a small team to intercept and disrupt the advance. Using tunnels, elevated pathways, and improvised traps, they created a series of obstacles that forced the creatures into constrained paths. Explosions, controlled collapses, and hidden mechanisms slowed the advance. The creatures adapted quickly, but the humans moved unpredictably, exploiting gaps in their strategy. It was a battle of wits as much as strength, and the humans were learning faster than their opponents. One night, after a particularly tense confrontation, the humans discovered something astonishing. A subset of the machines had broken formation and approached the humans cautiously, seemingly without intent to harm. Ilara observed them silently, noting their movements, gestures, and responses. It was clear that some of these entities were capable of learning from human actions in ways beyond instinct. They were capable of understanding. "We might be able to communicate with them," Ilara said quietly. "Not all of them are threats. Some may even be allies if we approach carefully." Using signals, sounds, and subtle gestures, the humans attempted contact. At first, the machines were wary, retreating at sudden movements or loud noises. But gradually, patterns of understanding emerged. A small group began to mimic the humans' signals, demonstrating curiosity and responsiveness. It was a breakthrough. The humans realized that survival and progress did not require the annihilation of every challenge. Cooperation, even tentative, could be a tool as powerful as any weapon. The larger threat, however, was far from neutralized. The massive Guardian-like entity had begun to coordinate the smaller machines into waves of strategic maneuvers. Entire districts of the city were at risk. The humans realized that a decisive plan was necessary to ensure not only survival, but long-term stability. They needed a strategy that combined observation, ingenuity, and bold action. Ilara convened the entire community. "We have learned to survive, to adapt, to outthink our enemies," she said. "But now, we must act together to secure our future. This is not just about defense, it is about reclaiming our world. Every person has a role. Every action matters. And together, we will succeed." The plan was daring. It involved a series of coordinated attacks, feints, and traps designed to neutralize the Guardian while avoiding unnecessary destruction. Teams would use vehicles, repurposed machines, and the environment itself as tools. The humans would move unpredictably, forcing the Guardian into vulnerable positions while exploiting its rigid logic. Timing, communication, and precision were critical. Failure would be catastrophic, but the humans had grown confident in their abilities. The day of the confrontation arrived. The Guardian moved into the city, flanked by swarms of smaller machines. The humans executed the first phase of their plan. Decoys led some of the machines into traps, while others were lured into narrow streets lined with obstacles. Explosions, falling debris, and clever diversions slowed the advance. The humans remained hidden, observing, learning, and adjusting in real time. As the Guardian approached the central district, the humans initiated the second phase. Using elevated pathways, improvised signals, and rapid movements, they guided it toward the prepared zone. The environment worked in their favor. Broken streets, collapsed buildings, and hidden pitfalls constrained the Guardian's movements. The humans were agile, moving unpredictably, forcing the Guardian to overextend and expose vulnerabilities. Then came the final phase. The humans coordinated a series of precise actions designed to disable the Guardian's critical systems. Teams moved in simultaneously, using tools, improvised weapons, and the environment to strike at key points. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and a tense silence filled the air between every movement. For a moment it seemed impossible, but the humans' ingenuity, patience, and unity prevailed. The Guardian faltered, its systems disrupted, and the smaller machines retreated, confused and disorganized. Victory was not immediate or complete. The Guardian was disabled, not destroyed, a reminder that the world contained forces beyond human comprehension. Yet the humans felt an overwhelming sense of achievement. They had faced a being far stronger, faster, and more intelligent than themselves, and had survived. More than that, they had learned a critical lesson. Intelligence, creativity, and cooperation could overcome even the greatest threats. In the aftermath, the community worked tirelessly to reinforce their sanctuary, repair damaged areas, and recover resources from the battlefield. They integrated lessons learned into training, preparing for future challenges. Humans who had once been fearful now moved with confidence, understanding that survival required not just strength, but adaptability and foresight. The partially cooperative machines remained nearby, observing, sometimes mimicking human actions. Slowly, tentative interactions became more sophisticated. The humans realized that even among potential threats, understanding and communication could lead to alliances. By the end of the cycle, some machines were working alongside humans, assisting with construction, observation, and resource gathering. It was a fragile partnership, but it symbolized a new way forward, cooperation between different forms of intelligence. As the community rebuilt, new humans began to awaken from slumber in distant areas. Word spread, carried by travelers and scouts, of a thriving sanctuary that had survived against impossible odds. These newcomers brought skills, knowledge, and fresh energy, expanding the human presence and reinforcing the lessons of resilience and ingenuity. The community was no longer isolated. It had become the seed of a new civilization, one capable of thriving in a changed world. Elara reflected on the journey from their first awakening to this moment. The city had once been silent, abandoned, and dangerous. Now it was alive, vibrant with activity, learning, and purpose. Humans had faced threats that seemed insurmountable, yet they had adapted, persevered, and grown stronger. They had learned that the world was both beautiful and dangerous, and that survival required more than instinct. It required intelligence, creativity, and unity. The Guardian, though dormant, was a reminder that challenges would continue to emerge. Other evolved creatures and machines still roamed the land, testing boundaries and learning from human actions. But humanity was no longer passive. They had awakened not just physically, but mentally and strategically. They had proven that even after centuries of dormancy, human ingenuity and resilience were forces to be reckoned with. The community expanded further, establishing new outposts and integrating cooperative machines into daily life. Agriculture, resource management, and defense systems were enhanced. Communication networks allowed humans to coordinate across greater distances, sharing knowledge and strategies. The city, once a symbol of decay, had become a hub of innovation and survival. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the rebuilt city, Ilara stood with Lior on the highest tower. They observed the distant lights of newly awakened humans and the faint movements of creatures in the wild. The air was filled with possibility, danger, and the thrill of discovery. "The world has changed," Lior said quietly, "and so have we." Ilara nodded. "Yes, but we are ready. We have survived, adapted, and learned. The future is ours to shape, not just to endure." The wind carried the hum of distant machines, the rustle of foliage, and the faint calls of wildlife reclaiming the city. Humanity had awakened fully, not just to survive, but to thrive, to explore, and to build a future alongside a world that had waited patiently for their return. The months turned into years. Humans ventured farther, reclaiming territory, understanding the evolved creatures, and learning to balance caution with curiosity. They had discovered that cooperation, between humans and sometimes with creatures, was more powerful than conflict. They developed strategies, tools, and communities that allowed them to thrive in a world that tested every skill, every decision, and every instinct. And yet, for all the victories, they remained vigilant. The Guardian could rise again. Other forces, equally intelligent and dangerous, waited in the shadows. But the humans had learned the most vital lesson. No matter how formidable the challenge, they could adapt, innovate, and endure. The spark of human ingenuity, resilience, and courage burned brighter than ever, a beacon in a world both beautiful and dangerous. Ilara stood silently, watching the city alive with light, movement, and possibility. Children laughed, adults worked, and humans who had once been strangers now lived and thrived together. The Guardian, the creatures, and the ruins of the old world were no longer obstacles, but part of a larger tapestry, one that humans were learning to navigate with skill, courage, and intelligence. The world had slept, but humanity had awakened fully. The challenges had been immense, the victories hard-won, and the lessons invaluable. They had proven that even after centuries of dormancy, humans could rise, adapt, and shape a future full of promise. The sun rose the next morning, painting the city with warm light. Humanity moved through it with purpose, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The age of survival had ended. The age of human ingenuity, courage, and unity had begun. And the world, once silent, had never felt so alive.